Welcome everybody to this virtual launch of Vic Fitzner's book, Early Christian Witnesses, Biblical and Theological Explorations. We had a launch of this book in Adelaide, face-to-face, launch of this in early December last year, 2021. Now this is an opportunity for us to send out the launch as a virtual launch to a wider audience, to people who were not able to be present here in Adelaide in December, and to others who we have through various email networks, so that the author and also Peter Lockwood can speak about the book. First, Peter will speak, and Peter was a colleague of Vic's at Australian Lutheran College for a number of years, and they were colleagues and collaborators. They both worked at various times on the Australian Lutheran Journal. And I don't think there was a very much of an overlap in the subject areas that you taught, but there was certain points of collaboration over the years. So congratulations, Vic, on this book, a fairly large volume. We will talk more about how this book can be purchased at the end of this event. But over to you, Peter, to talk first and launching the book.
Thank you very much, Hilary. And thank you, Vic, for this wonderful volume of collected essays. Far before Vic and I were colleagues on the faculty of what had been Luther Seminary, but what is now Australian Lutheran College, I was his student, very much in awe of Vic as he returned from his doctoral studies in Germany, sitting at the feet of Karl Heinrich Rengstorff and completing a doctoral dissertation on athletic imagery in Paul's letters, the Agon motif, a rather wonderful piece of work, which whose influence is found in the book itself. My awe and admiration, or admiration for Vic, stems from those early years in the classroom where New Testament theology simply came alive. It came alive through his teaching. The whole history of the interpretation of the New Testament, spanning through, in particular, the 20th century, but not ignoring the early church and the Reformation era by any stretch of the imagination, was one of Vic's very, very strong starting points. He understood the history of hermeneutics. It was as clear to him as the hairs on the back of his hand. He made it very, very clear to us as each wave in the history of interpretation of the New Testament took its place on the agenda, and he was able to absorb the best of each successive wave, leave to one side that which he regarded as maybe peripheral or maybe even missing the point, but always undergirded by a very, very strong Lutheran hermeneutic based fundamentally in Luther's theology of the cross. That was his guiding motif throughout. Enough for now, maybe. Much more can be said about this wonderful collection of 28 essays gathered around a number of themes. There are 7 discrete chapter or section areas, each with 4 or 5 chapters in them. And firstly on biblical hermeneutics and theology in general, then on the Synoptic Gospels and Acts, on John's, the corpus, the Johannine Gospel. What else do we have there? The whole Pauline corpus. Areas that Vic is very, very familiar with and only get partial mention in the book. 1 Peter, of course, under the influence of John Eliot, and Hebrews. One essay is devoted to the rhetoric of Hebrews. And then special interest areas of Vic that take him outside those discrete areas as well. For example, the athletic imagery in the New Testament. He's followed the conversation ever since he virtually initiated in the first place. And also the coins of the New Testament era, of the biblical era. He's always been fascinated by them, and especially the transition to the Constantinian era. What did that do to the coins that were made for the empire? I'll stop there, if that's okay.
All right. Before I invite Vic to speak, I want to thank Peter for that in launch and endorsement of the book. Is there anything more you'd like to say, Peter, about the book, or come back later?
I can say much more. Having launched it and having read it fairly thoroughly, and also kind of tidied up the launch presentation I made for a book review, possible book review. And so it's one of those things that has deeply impressed itself. Each chapter with its discrete specific emphasis has made a deep impression. It reminds me of the years that I spent at the seminary learning from Vic, and I'm sure that his former students will really appreciate this kind of an overarching, what you might say, resume of everything that, almost everything that we learned at his feet, but we can take it in smaller bites now, rather than having to quickly take down notes in the course of a lecture and then perhaps forget them fairly quickly. But I have to admit that as I read this material, it was as if it was as fresh as the day as new, because of the vivid way in which Vic always put things in his lectures, and so they were always extremely memorable. Perhaps just one other item that could be mentioned is Vic's churchmanship. Always in his essays, each one of his essays, he has the church in mind, preaching, teaching, and applying the text to the current issues of the day, the burning issues, ones that emerge in the life of the church. And so during his years as faculty member, and also as the chair of the Theology Commission of our church, it's also a commission on interchurch relations, Vic was very keenly aware of and sensitive to the issues raised by the charismatic movement. And so he engaged very closely, not with his harsh critical edge, but with a passionate pastoral heart for the people caught up in it, appreciating their concerns. The critique of the church and its theology that is implied and expressed through the charismatic movement, in terms of the fervour for the gospel, the more emotional involvement maybe in the life and worship of the church. These things he appreciated and he commended those who were part and parcel of that movement, and without also highlighting issues that can be problematical in terms of this very heavy emphasis on experience, sort of because of Vic's emphasis on the word, the clear word of God and the work of the Holy Spirit through the word, leading people to faith, and it cannot be founded on a person's emotional response to the word, but clearly simply and exclusively on the word of the text, the biblical text itself. That's one issue. Another one, of course, is the ordination of women, in which he became heavily involved in, both as the chair of CTICR and as the chief writer and proponent of the position for, although he was required necessarily to be as even-handed as he possibly could in discussing that, but he really dealt with the text with all of the thoroughness and rigour that they required in such an important conversation within the Lutheran Church of Australia, now also the Church of New Zealand. Another big area of interest for Vic that took him beyond the classroom to some extent was ecumenical dialogue, in particular the dialogue with the Anglican Church of Australia. He loved the conversations. He, together with his colleagues on the Anglican side of things, prepared a wonderful document over many years called Common Ground, expressing the commonality of the Christian faith from a Lutheran and Anglican perspective. The one hurdle, in a sense, always the hurdle, it was the question of bishops. And so I'm sure that Vic was very grateful that within our own communion, that particular issue has been addressed and finalised. And Vic was very keen to see Christ's prayer for the unity of the church, St. Paul's insistence thereon, presupposition the church was one that become enfleshed in the life and conduct of the church. In particular, that also affects our relations with other churches. That has a real input into the life of congregations in struggling situations in remote areas and places where either one or the other, or one of all three denominations is able to provide minister, a pastor, a priest to serve those particular communities. And Vic was passionate about furthering that particular cause as well. So whatever it was, Vic's teaching, whether it led to preaching, practical application in the life of the church, helping people to really wrestle with the text in a meaningful way rather than a one-sided way, was another one of his many fortes.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I should say at this stage that, following on from what Peter has said, that this volume of Vic's essays brings together in one volume a number of essays that have appeared in different places, as Peter alluded to, in different journals or chapters of different books. And it is in what is called the Scholars Collection, of which we've had about 10 different volumes over the last few years. The idea of the Scholars Collection is it brings together pieces of writing that have appeared over the years in different places, journals or books, which may have been lost over time, or alternatively show a progression of thought, or alternatively again, show a division of thought and ideas in different areas, as Peter spoke about, of churchmanship, of ecumenical dialogue, of the charismatic movement, or specific pieces related to specific themes. And so the idea of the Scholars Collection is that those who have been working and teaching and preaching in different areas over the years, we have identified within ACF Press as being one that being contributions that are such that should be put together in one volume in what we have called this Scholars Collection. And so it's recognition as by a publishing house of Vic as a scholar and is a collection. And so it's a recognition of him as a scholar, but it's also a recognition of him of the breadth of that work. And so that is why it is called a collection. So I'd like Vic now to make some comments that he would like to say in terms of responding to Peter's work, or to make his own comments, or to acknowledge various people who have assisted him along the way over the years to where he is as a scholar and contributing to a collection. So Vic, over to you.
Thank you, Hilary. I must say that as a person beginning to enter the stages of an antique at 84, I took a little bit of persuading to have this book published by ACF. But now I must say, Hilary, thank you for doing it. I am very honoured that you have deemed it worthy of publication. And I am also very honoured that you put it in the scholars list. I am also honoured by my dear friend and our colleague's words, Peter Lockwood. We were colleagues for a long time, friends for a long time, I do believe. I did even teach him for some time. Peter has been a wonderful friend and an astute critic. When Peter speaks, I listen. He's a scholar in his own right. Thank you, Peter, for the wonderful words that you said about the book. I hope they're all true. I am rather heartened by the fact that people who have read the first printing of the book, unfortunately there are a few errors in it, they have expressed favourable opinions and said they enjoyed reading it, which is what I would like. I have, as Peter has said, never been particularly interested in entering into a purely academic discussion of theology. I think theology belongs in the church. That doesn't mean to say it can't be done at university level. I myself studied in Germany where academics is highly prized. But the benefits of good, sound theology, also on an ecumenical level, are the things that interested me most. I said that I am entering into the area of antiquity. I not only like collecting antiques in the form of numismatics, Greek, Roman, Jewish, and Byzantine coins. I'm entering into the area where I myself am an antique. I hope that this book, however, while it does cover about 5 decades of my writing, will continue to contain material that is interest to a wide variety of people. I'm a Lutheran. I'm an unashamedly Lutheran, and I've taught in the Catholic Seminary here in Adelaide for 13 years. I've taught in ecumenical circumstances all over the situations over the world. So while I am a Lutheran, that doesn't mean to have a secular interest in insisting that everything that Lutherans have held is right. Ecumenical theology is vital these days, more than ever, that we present a united world to a secular world in particular, and a world of growing other religions. What interested me, particularly after coming back from Germany, I studied under a professor in the University of Münster, Westphalia, Professor Rengstorff, who he worked in the Luftwaffe, and he interestingly was part of a group that would begin their day by standing in line in front of the portrait of Hitler and spat at it. Die haben das Bild ausgespuckt, if you like German. They spat, instead of saluting the portrait, they spat at it. But that was Goering's Luftwaffe. He was pretty slack when it came to observing the rules of Nazi obligation. Rengstorff was an honorary member of the Jewish state of Israel because he helped as an officer in the Luftwaffe. He was ground crew, he wasn't flying. He helped to smuggle Jews out of Germany. And so when I was studying in Germany in the 1960s, I was part of a Jewish Christian, what was called the Jewish Christian Institute. Then when we were studying alongside of not only other scholars, particularly Roman Catholic scholars, but also Jewish. And so I got to know Professor Avraham Shalit of the University of Jerusalem, with whom I helped to complete the works, concordance to the works of Josephus. As I was in Germany, of course, I imbibed all of the controversy that was on over there then, the Bultmann controversy, the controversy over the new hermeneutic of Ebeling, Fuchs, and so on. And a lot of that, of course, is reflected in this book. We are what we, theologically, we are what we were brought up to be. And I cannot deny that, that there's quite a bit of material there that reflects those formative years in Germany, where I learned so much. But I would hope that some of those issues are still relevant for today. I also imbibed an interest in what is characteristically Lutheran in hermeneutics. And this is where my interest in charismatic theology comes in, and other forms of theology where the Lutheran hermeneutic would definitely have something negative to say. What I'm getting at is that Luther's theology of the cross is something that is increasingly understood now beyond the borders of the Lutheran Church. And that's the Lutheran, that's the hermeneutic, which is the God of upside down values. He lowers the proud and lifts the humble up. It's the God who works through the opposites. He works e contrariis. You see the God of grace and mercy hanging on a tree. The theology of glory, which is so prominent today, is something that I don't think really speaks to the human situation. God is the suffering God. God hangs on a tree. And so to look at God in terms of success, victory, triumph only, granted that the Easter is a triumph, that is to misunderstand what I believe to be the heart of Scripture, and that is God's action in Jesus Christ. A person like, sorry, I don't want to bring too much politics into this, but a person like Donald Trump would not have a clue what Christianity is about from that angle. It's all strength, triumph, victory, winning. But to get back to the point, I am also interested in, of course, the exegesis of certain passages. And so you have exegetical studies on various questions, especially in the Gospel of St. John. One of my favorite areas is the Passion story in the Gospel of John, where John has, in an absolute wonderful way, presented the Passion story in actual fact as a coronation, if you look carefully at it. And he is raised to glory on the cross. Superficial reading, a reading which simply concentrates on historical accuracy and things like that. You know, did it really happen like that? That kind of approach misses the point. The other areas of interest, well, as Peter mentioned, I'm interested in coins. I've been a coin collector for 50 years. And I have come to the conviction that the story of Constantine can't be told without numismatics. The story that he was the first Christian emperor, then he changed the empire and so on. Well, to judge from the coins, nothing was changed. He still issued right up to the end coins lauding the pagan gods and goddesses and so on. So publicly, there was no change. Now that raises the question why, so I attempt to answer that with reference to numismatics. Again, let me finish by simply saying, Hilary, I'm indebted to you for publishing this book. I hope it will be of interest to a lot of people and way beyond my own circles. Certainly there are people overseas where I have taught who will be interested, because it contains essays that were published in England, in Southeast Asia, in America, apart from, of course, Australia. And the fact that it covers a whole span of years, 5 decades at least, may not militate against its relevance. A lot of the contemporary theologies are simply chewing over what has been discussed in the past. These issues don't go away. And I would hope that in some small way, this volume will contribute also to students who are searching exegetical questions, theological questions. I think I'll leave it at that. Much more could be said, but again, I thank particularly you, Hilary, for your kindness and patience with me. A lot of the articles, of course, have been deleted from my file when I retired nearly 20 years ago, so they had to be retyped. And some of the initial errors, of course, with my typing. And I was also, again, I would also like to thank Peter again for his very kind words. That's enough. If only we can just let Peter's out to the multitudes. I rest content. Thank you, Hilary.
Thank you, Vic. Just a few words in closing. Vic referred and Peter referred to there being 28 essays. That makes the book well over 300 pages, a very big book, and includes a whole range of subjects as we've discussed in different sections. But I'd like to acknowledge, as Vic was just referring to, that a lot of the papers had to be retyped. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank the enormous amount of time and work that Vic spent in doing that and typing up the essays. There's always a bit of a problem when you have stuff that has been in a pre-digital age, or when essays have been written many years ago and have been lost in translation or lost in changed computers many times, or some of them are being pre-computer even. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank Vic very much for the amount of work that he put into this volume. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the work that he did in putting the index together. And of course, there are various other people associated with publications that need to be acknowledged. The people who do the cover design, the people who do the layout. I'd like to acknowledge our colleague here, Gabriel, who has spent many hours on this book as well with the InDesign program, where we got things coming back and forth from our layout people, and various versions of this were on various computers. So I'd like to acknowledge all of those different people who put time and effort into getting a volume together. It's never just one person who is involved in this process. So,
Hillary, add one more thing.
Yes.
I forgot a very important thing. I want to pay tribute to my dear friend Gordon Watson.
Yes, I was hoping you would.
Very
Yes.
kind, wrote a reference to the back page.
Yeah.
That is so generous of him, that's so kind. He's a very dear mutual friend of Hillary and myself, now living in retirement, a very, very well noted Uniting Church systematician. And I had the honor of editing his, or re-editing his doctoral thesis many years ago. He's a Barth scholar, but he also understands Lutheran theology. Thanks, Hillary. I wanted to...
Yes, I was hoping you would. So, as mentioned, this book is in, well, I haven't mentioned, the book is in international distribution through ISD, Ian Stevens Distribution in the US, or Gazelle Publications in the UK, or alternatively off our website. The website sells it softcover, hardcover, or EPUB. And at the present time, because we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of our organisation, and I must acknowledge that both Vic and Gordon were some of the founding persons, we can't call them founding fathers these days, but founding persons associated with ATF and ATF Press 30 years ago. We need to acknowledge them and others along the way. This book is available there on our website. And because it's our 30th anniversary, we have a special deal until the 30th of May, where any publication is available at 30% off. So please go to atfpress.com and you will be able to find the book there, along with many other books, and you can order it and it will be sent to you from our printer. So atfpress.com is where it can be found, and you can put the code in ATF30 and you'll get 30% discount on that publication. So once again, many thanks for allowing us to and giving us the honour and privilege of having this collection in our series. Thank you for Peter for this fantastic launch, and all those who are associated with the press. Thank you, and good afternoon or good night, wherever you are watching this. Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary.